Hello and Happy New Year and welcome to another year of T2RL Talks, our regular podcast where we discuss some of the events and some of the reports that we've made in the course of the year. And I'll start with an apology to a number of people who approached me during the end of year conference season to complain that we haven't done a T2RL Talks podcast for a couple of months. There was one we were trying to set up, but for various reasons it refused to come together. So we've given you some time off. But for today, we're going to be talking about the new year and the state of play on the move towards modern airline retailing. We're about to publish, probably by the end of this week, our quarterly report on the state of offer, order, settle, deliver, and new distribution technologies, including NDC. And to talk about these things, I have two guests in the studio. Ian Luck, who needs little introduction, who is the president of our airline distribution practice, and a newcomer, Keith Martin, who has joined T2RL towards the end of last year after a distinguished career in a very large airline group where he was involved in the move towards modern airline retailing on behalf of a group of very significant airlines. So welcome Ian and welcome Keith, and Happy New Year to you both.
Thank you, Ian.
So in our report, we try to highlight some of the main events that are going on. And for my mind, one of the biggest events towards the end of last year was the final settlement of all the legal shenanigans between American Airlines and Sabre. Shenanigans that actually started with US Airways, the merger with American. And in conjunction with the settlement, for which the judge in the case congratulated them on finally getting there, they also announced an extension to their technology relationship for multiple years. Interestingly, no specific period was mentioned. But I think that's very significant because American has had on a number of occasions, has fought to break away from Sabre, but has always come back to the fold, and it seems to have done that again, at least for the next few years. Do we have any thoughts on that, Keith?
I think it's a really interesting one. We know they've been on the retailing side. They've really been doing a lot of investigation with providers out there, a lot of POCs, looking at what can be done in capabilities wise. And I think it's one to watch. I don't think the industry has settled exactly as to where retailing will be. I don't think American has decided either. And I think it's one to definitely to watch. We will see as we move into a more modular world. There could be opportunities to see more modules being given to best in breed for specific capabilities. So I think we will see some different things, I think, coming in the future.
Yeah, I think that point about modularity is important, and it's one we'll come back to in probably in a few minutes' time. And on POCs, I know that when Sabre announced the launch of Sabre Mosaic, they did say that American was one of the airlines that's done a POC or is doing a POC with them. Yes. So there's certainly something going on there. Another quite significant development over 2024 was the substantially increased take-up of at least NDC contracts between airlines and GDSs. There's a question about what sort of booking volumes those have driven, but the number of airlines contracted to provide their NDC content via the GDSs has increased substantially. Ian, do you think this is important? Do you think this is signaling something to come?
Well, it's clearly been a very significant part of the distribution world for the last 5 to 10 years. And in the recent years, with GDSs being more critical part of the kind of NDC rollout, in the early years, it was mainly direct connects and NDC aggregators. We still believe, to your point, Ian, that booking volumes are more on the direct connect and aggregator space, with the likes of the large European carriers, some of the big US carriers and others who've been involved in NDC for 5, 10 years or even more. But we are definitely seeing GDS NDC volumes increasing. Amadeus said late last year that of the 29 airlines they have that are live on NDC, those airlines are in the mid-teens in terms of NDC adoption overall. That overall, they said they're still mid-single digit because, of course, they have 29 airlines out of their total is still not very many in total of the global airlines that Amadeus distributes. So GDS NDC volume is still relatively small. We assume it will increase. There's a really interesting question about, will it increase rapidly as more airlines get on board and to the GDS is even re-intermediate, I think is a word I heard. I'm not sure if that's a real word or not. Or do, the large OTAs continue with direct connections, the aggregators that have established themselves like Travel Fusion, do they continue to be the sort of larger part of NDC adoption? I think that's going to be a kind of fascinating trend over the next few years to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things. It's important to distinguish between growth in GDS NDC bookings that is genuinely new activity in NDC and growth that's just taking away from the direct connect or existing aggregator market. My feeling is that it will actually increase the overall. I don't think it's going to be primarily cannibalizing the aggregator or direct connect market, but would you agree with that, Keith, or do you think I'm wrong on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. NDC continues to grow. Not everyone has even moved to NDC, right? We still have the airline retailing maturity index. We haven't got everyone already moved to NDC. It's a prerequisite for offer and order, so it's the kind of first stepping stone. And there's still some people undertaking that journey. So once the actual market becomes more mature within NDC and it's a wider coverage, I think we will definitely see more significant growth. But it's still, it's still disappointing in itself.
Okay. Yeah, I see some airlines. I see some airlines that are launching NDC now and launching with the GDSs as their first distribution platform. So they're definitely not taking NDC volume away from the established NDC bookings that are there because they're definitely new NDC bookings. And I think we also see NDC GDS growing perhaps in the TMC space. We see that's been slow and more difficult for lots of reasons. But we're starting to see some positive news from GBT towards the end of this year. Amex talking about NDC kind of starting to grow. Yes. We're seeing Concur bring NDC airlines on board via GDS, which is important for the TMCs that want to stay that way. So I think that's another area where NDC volume's coming, but it's still an interesting one. It's still early days, so we'll have to see how fast it progresses.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? 13 years on from the announcement of NDC, we're still saying it's early days. Yeah. Let no one ever tell you that the airline technology industry is dynamic and fast moving. Just while we're talking about this area, it's probably worth pointing out for those who are subscribers to T2RL.net that we are now tracking all of the airline NDC contracts with the 4 major GDSs. And we're also tracking the proportion of the world market that's represented by those airlines. One of the things we've observed is that most of the airlines signing up for these contracts are at the bigger end of the spectrum. They're the big tier 1 and tier 2 carriers. So even though the numbers of airlines, 80 or so out of 1,000, are quite small, in terms of the proportion of the market they represent, it's much bigger than that. And something like a quarter of the market is now bookable using NDC via the GDS. Whether they actually get booked that way is an entirely different question, of course. So Keith, you mentioned modularity, and in the last few months, one of the big wins for the idea of modularity, which is certainly central to IATA's vision of the move to offers and orders, has been at Riyadh Air, where Riyadh Air is going to implement, is in the process of implementing an offer and order solution with a hybrid from Flyer and Sabre. Do you think this is a harbinger of things to come? Do you think others will follow that path?
Yes, I think absolutely. It's a really interesting case, right? Riyadh is this beautiful opportunity where you're starting up into a ticketless environment to really take the best of breed from these modules that are available. And we see this relationship between Flyer and Sabre. And what that actually means yet is a little bit fuzzy. It's not exactly clear as to how they're going to operate together and how the modules are going to sit together or who's doing what. And I think that's something that that needs to be clarified. But this is the way I think the future will be. There will be best of breed and specialists or the right partner for the right module for the right capabilities. And it will be requiring multiple vendors to work together and have that kind of interconnectivity and plug and play options to have the technology seamlessly communicate and orchestrate together. Yeah.
Okay, I feel that as with PSS, as with most things, it's kind of okay for the very large airlines to say, yes, we're going to go best of breed and we're going to integrate solutions from different vendors and so on and so on.
No, you're very right.
There's like 800 airlines out there who are relatively small and relatively under-resourced. Do you think the technology is mature enough yet for those airlines to consider best of breed solutions?
No, maybe I should say in a second wave. Really, in the first wave, I think most airlines will be going with a single stack. This is a huge technological leap. We are going into uncharted territories. There's a lot of feeling around in the dark still. We don't know exactly where the technology is going to end up, nor do we know the capabilities that we actually want to achieve in terms of retailing or how we want to behave. So we're still in this first wave where I think most, as you say, you're very right, Ian, most airlines will be going with a single vendor for the technology. I think, as you rightly said, the bigger airlines are looking for those best in breeds. And I think maybe for a second iteration of a contract, then the smaller airlines would indeed potentially look at pick and mix of the different modules that are available of what can really work the best for them.
One of the things that I think will be important for airlines is even if they start by implementing the solution of a large vendor that can offer them virtually all the modules, they have a contract that enables modularity. Actually, at our conference, we heard British Airways and Amadeus talk on stage about their offer order deal. And they both talked about the fact that that was set up in a modular way. And so although it sounded like BA was planning to take most of the Nevio suite from Amadeus, they had options to plug and play alternative things over time. And I think that's going to be really important. A bit of a plug to our procurement processes, but that's going to be really important as airlines procure OOSD solutions, that even if they want to go all in or mostly all in with one supplier, they give themselves the choice to implement other modules later on.
That's actually really interesting, because I think I first heard the term future-proofing in relation to technology sometime around the early 1980s. But then it was about the technology. I think what we're saying now is that it's absolutely essential that your contracts are future-proofed just as much as your technology.
Yeah, as I was saying, we don't know in the next iteration, the next 5 to 10 years, what exactly the capabilities we will want. So you do want that agility built into your contracting to ensure that what was traditionally a single contract with the PSS, which was just the big black box with one kind of contract. Now we really need that opportunity to be able to split the contracts and not have everything else be put at risk, but indeed have the contracts modular and as clean and in between them as possible.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that is almost as big an issue, almost as big a requirement as it is to get the technology right, is to get that contractual relationship right, or that set of contractual relationships right. And as Ian rightly says, that's exactly what we try to achieve within our Procure IT process when we work with airlines on procurement. Moving on just a little bit, we know that Amadeus, with its Nevio suite, has got some launch customers. We know that Sabre has now got a strong launch customer in Virgin Australia for its Sabre Mosaic, and of course we've just talked about what it's going to be doing at Riyadh. Back in October at the IATA World Passenger Symposium, Accelia announced the launch of their, I think it's called FLX1, is that their comprehensive suite? So far, I haven't heard any indication that they have a launch customer for the full suite. But of course, Accelia is the leading supplier of NDC APIs to the world's airlines. I actually think this could be important. And I think it's interesting that Accelia has entered into some relationships with DXC and with CETA to essentially plug the gaps so they can offer a soup to nuts OOSD environment, even though maybe the tier one airlines that work with them don't necessarily want to take the whole suite from Accelia. Do you agree with me that Accelia could be an important player in this field?
I don't know what you think, Keith. I certainly think they are a really interesting alternative. Clearly, when we look at kind of PSS share today, Amadeus and Navitaire are 1 and 2. We've got Sabre, we've got Travel Sky in China, we've got a few big in-house solutions left, and then we start to get to quite a few other good vendors, but typically vendors that deal with tier 3, 4 smaller airlines. Accelia is a strong technology provider to some really large airlines. I mean, particularly sort of NDC and merchandising, as you mentioned, Ian. We've got American and United and Lufthansa and Emirates and Qantas and a number of others. So some really significant players that use Fairlogic's Accelia. And Accelia also has revenue accounting and other solutions that are pretty well used. So they're a sort of known supplier for quite a lot of large airlines. And I think whether any large airlines decide to move from PSS to a full Accelia stack, I think that'll be fascinating if we see that happen. But I think they're probably a really credible player that people would be inviting to RFPs if they're open to it.
Okay, in time-honored fashion, we should say other vendors are available, and there are certainly others who are moving to try and enter this market. People like Pros, people like TCS,
Datalex,
IBE.
We could go on. We could actually list probably about 10 or 15 that have got credible offerings in this area. It will be really interesting to see the way that market consolidates. I guess
what's true is that there are not many that are, your words, Ian, soup to nuts. There are not many that can fill the whole space. There's quite a few that are strong in kind of merchandising or offer order, but maybe they don't have delivery or they don't have that end. And I guess that's what was interesting about Accelia's move, was they were really trying to move away from just being a strong player in parts of the stack to try and sort of fill the gap, which is, there's not many people in that position.
I think you said, Ian, that there are also some vendors who really concentrate on the smaller airlines, on the lower end of the market. People like TTI and Q and others. I think possibly what TTI are going to do now they're under the ownership of Citizen Plane and with some big ambitions to develop the technology there. I think that will be one to watch for the tier 3s and 4s of this world.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And Keith, you were mentioning IBS and others. They've got a lot of smaller clients, but I think they've got ambition to grow as well. And there's quite a few in that smaller airline space that have got a strong product for that group of airlines. And it'll be interesting to see if they can grow into the larger airline segment.
Yeah, one of the challenges, of course, is going to be that the standards for interoperability between some of these systems are still in their infancy. We keep pointing out that there isn't even a standard for how you create an order out of an offer,
Yes.
and those technology vendors that are providing both offer and order solutions are just solving it internally for themselves. But really, I think the industry is crying out for an industry standard on that one.
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening in the IATA side with the working groups and the consortium and others. They're trying to put in place. It's just a lot of work, and it just needs to be thrashed out with everyone in as much detail as possible. It is coming. I'm confident it's coming. But before then, anyway, vendors will build their bespoke solutions and then agree to move towards the standards whenever they come in place. That's the only really efficient way forward, given the pace of the transformation right now. I think they will come. I won't say soon, but they're coming.
Do you think that the move to an industry agreed standard will be overtaken by just the real politique of Amadeus coming along and saying, okay, we've got a third of the market already, and if you want to connect to me, this is how you do it?
That's a real possibility. We did see Dacius on stage at WPS last year talking about standards and how they will be one of the leading voices within the standard setting. Of course, they have a huge role to play, and they will be involved in the standards. But I think there's a genuine push from the airlines in this iteration of a transformation to see a standard which is to enable that plug and play and ability to move and the modularity, to see a standard which is as clean as possible, that fits the airline's needs rather than the technology.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that that's what an awful lot of people want to see happen. My niggling doubt is that will that actually be achievable? We shall see.
Good question.
Okay, so we've seen, as I said, launch customers for Nevio. We've seen British Airways, Finnair, Saudia are the launch customers for Nevio. We've seen Virgin Australia being the launch customer for Sabre Mosaic. Who's next? Which major airlines are going to be next into the fray, do we think? I'm going to ask Ian first because Keith is smiling at me because he has some inside knowledge that he can't really talk about. So I'm going to ask a nice neutral Ian Luck.
Yeah, I mean, T2RL as a company also has quite a bit of inside knowledge because we do. Working on,
and we obviously always have to be careful about that.
Yeah,
I mean, nevertheless, there's quite a lot in the public domain.
Yes, that's right. I mean, let me start with some public domain and some general thoughts. I mean, I'll talk about Lufthansa instead of Keith. I mean, we know they announced on stage at our event a while ago now that they were very focused on the move to offer order and trying to be off tickets and P&Rs and to move to that modern retailing world by the end of the decade. So, we're pretty sure that continues apace. We don't know when there'll be any announcements in that area, but I think any large airline that really wants to be off by the end of the decade needs to be making progress now. So I'm sure there is work going on there, lots of hard work going on there. There are interesting cases of airlines merging. Hawaiian and Alaskan have to make some decisions about what they're going to do. I mean, any airline that is currently looking at the future of their PSS, whether that's because of a merger or whether it's just because their current deal runs out in 2027 or 2028, needs to be thinking about this. It would be crazy to sign a sort of 10-year PSS deal running from 2027 to 2037. That's, PSS deals typically are 10 years long. without building in a transition to offer order. It could well be that the next PSS deal, we've talked about this before on our podcasts, the next PSS deal people sign starts as a PSS deal and transitions to an offer order model over the period of the contract. And so, we know quite a lot of airlines. I'm sure there's lots of airlines that we don't know as well, whose contracts expire in the next 3 or 4 years, and therefore almost by definition, they have to be thinking about this. It's a big driver of change in contract date.
So far, it seems to me that the European major airlines are taking the lead on this a little bit. Let's just talk about North America for a moment. In North America, 2 of the very large network airlines actually run their own PSS in-house. I've got a feeling that they are going to be the ones who are most keen on moving to a modular solution. So to buy in some pieces, some components, and integrate it into the systems that they run in-house. And I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast knows who we're talking about. Is Delta and United are the ones who run their own systems in-house. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's the way they will go?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've seen announcements from United where they've moved everything to AWS and they're doing a lot of capabilities transformations. I think we will see exactly that. They are not on the same kind of burning platform that some who have a contract running coming to an end. But yet they're still sitting on a stack of technology which they have do the management of itself, all their in-house work. It's really now a numbers game for them to decide whether it makes sense as to how much of these modules, external modules that are now coming onto the market, how much makes sense for them to actually transfer into, or can they rework with the stack that they've got into offer and order standards.
To some extent, they're already partly modular, aren't they? I mean, nearly every airline is partly modular in a way, and they both use Fairlogics. Well, United already uses Fairlogics. Delta's announced they're going to use Fairlogics for NDC and some merchandising. I think they both use Google for pricing for IT. Yes. So there's, to some extent, they've got bits of modularity already. I guess the big question is, does the core res inventory, the DCS, does that stuff become modular as well? That's probably the big question.
Yes, and are they going to recreate it? Are they going to recreate it in the new world themselves in-house, or are they actually just going to outsource it and buy it from one of the
bits and pieces? Yeah.
This is a question which, it's not clear right now. I don't think it's, and neither of them made any kind of pronouncements on the topic. But it's a very interesting case. It's we've got others, right? We've got Emirates and others that have in-house, which is clearly important. This is one to watch for sure. Like Riyadh. It's a bit of an external use case or a strange use case, which is one that we will be watching closely to see actually what kind of transformation they do make and what they can actually bring. It'll be very interesting, I think.
And moving around the globe into Asia and Asia Pacific particularly, the airlines, the big airlines there, don't seem to be treating this quite as urgently, maybe, as some of their contemporaries in Europe and North America. Yes. I think we might see a bit of a time lag before the move to OOSD spreads into that region.
Yeah, I think so. I think their long tail post COVID was actually coming out and ramping up. It took them a bit longer than us, so they're a little bit more delayed in their behavior. And airlines are notoriously risk adverse anyway. They are culturally indeed more risk adverse. So I think across all of Asia, though, we will definitely see some movements. I think we won't give any T2RL secrets away, but we will definitely see some movements in Asia coming shortly. Yeah.
It's also true in Asia. The travel agency selling is more important. When we look at our data, the travel agency channel is much more significant. It's important in Europe and America, but whereas airline direct channels have made quite a big drive through Europe and the US, the travel agency channel is bigger in Asia Pacific, and that we know that travel agency change to offer an order in NDC is complex. So that's probably another reason. With the exceptions of perhaps Qantas and Singapore, we're starting to see a few others, but we still haven't seen a lot of people do much in the NDC space either compared to Europe or the US. So it feels like it's following along behind, but I think there will be more changes coming.
Yeah, and of course in Asia, you've got two absolutely enormous markets that are still early in the process. I'm talking about China and India, two huge markets, neither of which is particularly far advanced yet in this respect.
Yeah, I guess they're different, aren't they? China with the Travel Sky piece is a very special case. India was starting to see some movement. I mean, there's been API distribution in India before in the low cost space.
Well, before there was even NDC, there was API distribution in India.
That's right.
Very importantly.
But yeah, I think India, we're starting to see more change. Air India, revitalizing, and they've announced NDC agreements. Indigo, I think, using NDC as well as the homegrown Navitaire API. So yeah, I think there'll be more change in India and China, but China is a special case.
China is always a special case. Absolutely. Okay, as we sort of come to an end or towards the end of this roundup of what's happening in the wonderful world of airline technology, here we are. It's the first week, I think. We're now into the second week of January in 2025. What are you looking to see during this year in this area? What developments are we going to see, Ian?
I would like to see version 2021.3 of NDC fully implemented in 2025. I mean, that was an important update to the standard. It was, done during COVID, and maybe there was some sort of delays to implementation. It obviously needs airlines to decide to implement it. It needs vendors like Farelogix and Amadeus to be ready to implement it, and then it needs the onward. So it always does take some time when new versions come into play, but I think that would help adoption if we could get more people moving to 21.3. And I think both Farelogix and Amadeus, as the biggest two vendors, are doing that. And I've seen more airlines talking about moving to 21.3. So I think that would be good. The other one in the distribution space for me that I would hope and like to see would be the TMC adoption side that we touched on earlier. Like to think that TMCs, GDSs, online booking tools, and those TMCs like Amtrav and TravelPerk and Navan and others that do direct connects, whichever sort of method they want to use. I'd like to think the corporate space would accelerate this year from relatively low numbers historically.
Okay. Keith, is your crystal ball telling you anything interesting about 2025?
Well, 2024, it was an interesting year. There was still a lot going on in terms of business case and buy-in with executives, and really just trying to find our feet in terms of how best to move forward. I think 2025 will show a major change. I think we will start to see a lot more. I'm hoping we have BA, but I'm hoping the other two big three in Europe will make a move. We need a few more big airlines to actually make their move, to actually give confidence to the smaller airlines to start investigating this more seriously. I think those floodgates will open in 2025. I'm quietly confident that we will definitely see, and hopefully everyone understands that the level of the complexity of this challenge. And just to know that T2RL is here, of course, a plug.
Of course.
to help.
I mean, we heard at our conference David Hogarth from Virgin Australia saying they will make their first order in 2025.
Exactly.
They absolutely did.
So, as well as contracts being signed that we saw last year, we should start to see some airlines moving from PSS and tickets to orders. And again, hopefully that builds confidence, builds momentum. And airlines most of these airlines have got interline partners, so they have to start explaining what they're doing to their codeshare partners and their alliance partners and things. So it hopefully does starts to move the ball forward a bit faster now that we've got some kind of real activity.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've read the tea leaves as well, and I agree with pretty much everything Ian and Keith have said. I also think that we will see a number of large airlines commit to a move to OOSD, either by buying a complete package from an Amadeus or a Sabre, or by entering into an integration project. I also think that some of the vendors who are really keen to make inroads into this market and have invested quite considerably will be getting a little bit concerned if they haven't made any major sales by the end of 2025. And it's entirely possible we might see a little bit of consolidation in the vendor space in this respect. So maybe that's going out on a limb a little bit, but I think if those people who've invested heavily over the last 3-5 years don't start to see some returns fairly soon, they may start looking for other solutions. There you go, going out on a limb. I think we've had a pretty good wide-ranging conversation. A lot of what we've been talking about is included in the quarterly OOSD report that should be published on t2rl.net this week. And we've got a number of other reports coming up, including the what we used to call the IBE report, but now it's the sort of digital marketing report. And we've got our general T2RL look at the state of the industry and the state of the world as we enter into the new year. So they're all being published in the next few days on t2rl.net. There's an awful lot there. If you have a subscription already and you haven't looked for a while, take a look, because there's probably more there than you imagine. And if you don't have a subscription, why on earth not? So I'd like to thank Ian, and I'd like to thank Keith for the discussion, and I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to talking to you again in the next edition of T2R Talks.